These chemical burns belong to a 22-year-old factory worker who dyes clothes for a brand you probably have in your closet right now. That outfit you just bought for $9.99? It might contain up to 27 different toxic chemicals, many of which are banned in the US and EU but still end up in your clothes. The fast fashion industry produces over 100 billion garments annually. That's nearly 14 new items for every person on Earth every year. But what most consumers don't realize is that clothing production is one of the most chemically intensive industries on the planet. After 6 months investigating supply chains, testing clothing samples, and interviewing textile workers and toxicologists, I've uncovered 3 disturbing truths about the chemicals in your clothes that brands are desperate to hide.
Of fashion, fast fashion, as we all know, big subject of the moment. It's generated almost 2 million tons of waste last year alone, with more than 90% of all garments going to landfill, this according to the Earth Organization.
First, I'll reveal the actual toxic chemicals found in random samples of popular fast fashion items and why some of them are known carcinogens. Second, I'll show you the devastating health effects these chemicals are having on factory workers, effects that brands have systematically covered up for decades. And finally, I'll expose how these same chemicals are affecting you as a consumer, including what happens when these toxins enter your body through skin absorption. What makes this especially troubling is that while the EU has banned over 1,300 chemicals from cosmetics, there are almost no restrictions on the same chemicals in clothing, items that touch your skin all day, every day. By the end of this video, you will never look at that $9.99 t-shirt the same way again. To understand what's really in fast fashion, I purchased 20 random items from top fast fashion retailers and sent them to an independent laboratory for testing. The results were shocking. Every single item contained at least one potentially harmful chemical, with the average garment containing 13 different chemical compounds of concern. Let me walk you through the most concerning findings. NPEs were found in 89% of the items tested. These chemicals are endocrine disruptors that mimic estrogen in the body and have been linked to reproductive issues. They are banned in the EU for most uses, but not in imported clothing. Phthalates, which make plastics flexible and are linked to hormone disruption, were found in 72% of items, particularly in printed designs and synthetic materials. Perhaps most concerning was the presence of formaldehyde in 65% of the items. Yes, the same chemical used to preserve dead bodies is deliberately added to clothing to prevent wrinkling and mildew. Formaldehyde is a known human carcinogen, explained Dr. Linda Birnbaum, former director of the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences. There's no safe level of exposure to a carcinogen. But here's where it gets even more disturbing. While consumers receive low doses of these chemicals through skin contact, textile workers face extreme exposure during manufacturing. In textile hubs like Bangladesh, India, and China, workers often handle these chemicals with minimal or no protective equipment. I spoke with textile workers in Bangladesh who described horrific health effects. My hands started burning after 3 months working with these dyes. Now I have constant breathing problems and cannot work more than a few hours without becoming dizzy. The factory says it's not their problem. Medical researchers in textile-producing regions have documented alarming health patterns among workers. Respiratory diseases are 3 to 4 times the normal rate, skin conditions affecting up to 70% of textile workers, elevated cancer rates, particularly bladder and liver cancer, reproductive issues including miscarriages and birth defects. What makes this particularly egregious is that safer alternatives exist for almost every toxic chemical used. They're just more expensive. Internal industry documents I've obtained show that replacing these harmful chemicals would add approximately 18 to 27 cents to the production cost of a typical garment. The decision to use these chemicals is purely financial, explains a former compliance officer for a major fashion brand who asked to remain anonymous. Brands know exactly what's happening to these workers. They just calculate that the cost of changing is higher than the cost of looking the other way. And this leads us to perhaps the most personal aspect of this issue. You might be thinking, but I wash my clothes before wearing them, so I'm safe, right? Unfortunately, washing removes only a portion of these chemicals, and some, like PFAS, the forever chemicals, are specifically designed to remain in fabrics through hundreds of washes. Dr. Anne Steinman, who studies chemical exposures from consumer products, tested clothing before and after multiple washes. Even after 10 washes, we found significant levels of restricted chemicals still present in the fabrics. Some chemicals, particularly dyes and finishing agents, are designed to bond permanently with the fibers. The health implications for consumers are concerning. Skin absorption of these chemicals have been linked to contact dermatitis, which affects up to 10% of the population. Endocrine-disrupting chemicals like NPEs and phthalates can affect hormone function even at low doses. Formaldehyde exposure is associated with respiratory issues and skin irritation. Some dyes, particularly azo dyes, can break down into carcinogenic compounds. Children are particularly vulnerable to these chemical exposures. Children have thinner skin, higher surface area relative to body weight, and developing organ systems, explains pediatric environmental health specialist Dr. Ruth Etzel. Chemical exposures that might have minimal effects on adults can have significant impact on developing children. What's particularly troubling is the cumulative effect of these exposures. We're not just exposed to these chemicals through clothing, explains toxicologist Dr. Philip Landrigan. They're in our food packaging, furniture, and household products. The cumulative effect, what scientists call the body burden, is what concerns us most. So, why isn't more being done to protect workers and consumers? The answer lies in a perfect storm of regulatory gaps, corporate influence, and consumer unawareness. Unlike food and cosmetics, clothing has minimal chemical regulations in most countries. The US has no comprehensive law governing chemicals and textiles. When regulations are proposed, they face fierce industry opposition. Internal documents show one industry group spent $27 million lobbying against a bill that would have required disclosure of chemicals in consumer products. Meanwhile, brands hide behind complex supply chains. When we approach brands about chemical usage, they claim they don't control the suppliers' practices, explains fashion sustainability advocate Maxine Beidat. But these same brands dictate exactly how many stitches per inch their suppliers must use. They control everything about production except the things that might cost them money. Some progress is being made. The ZDHC, Zero Discharge of Hazardous Chemicals initiative, has led some brands to eliminate certain chemicals, and the EU's REACH regulations are slowly expanding. But these efforts remain voluntary or limited in scope. The toxic reality of fast fashion represents one of the most widespread chemical exposure events in human history, affecting millions of workers and billions of consumers. My goal isn't to induce panic, but to provide the information brands don't want you to have so you can make informed choices. If you found this eye-opening, you won't want to miss next week's video where I expose how sustainable fashion collections are often the biggest greenwashing scams in the industry. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss it. The fashion industry is counting on your ignorance, but together, we can change that. For those who want to protect themselves, I've created a guide to the least toxic clothing brands and how to reduce chemical exposure from your existing wardrobe, linked in the description. Remember, the clothes you wear shouldn't come at the cost of someone else's health or your own.